my advice to everybody is to find professionals that make money the same way you make money. So if you're going to hire professional attorneys, CPAs, CFOs, MBAs, investment strategists, etc., make sure that they make money in real estate. If that's the way that you're wanting to make money, right? That they actually do it for themselves as much as they help you with. And then try to push as much as you possibly can to them, because they're already going to have efficiencies and insights and how all of the pieces need to fit together.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owners Association, where real estate investors have found success since 1968. I'm your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group. This episode is sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. And RCB and Associates, helping real estate investors and small business owners navigate the complex world of health insurance and Medicare benefits at rcbassociatesllc.com. Hello and welcome to episode 417. No one ever wants or expects to find themselves in a lawsuit. But when you're a real estate investor, it's always something you need to protect yourself against. And my guest today is a real estate investor and asset protection attorney, and he's going to share his asset protection techniques for real estate investors and discuss how you can become the CEO of your own wealth building company. Scott Royal Smith is the founder and CEO of Royal Legal Solutions, offering tax, business, and legal strategies to clients in the United States and Canada. Scott, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Brian.
I know you talk about asset protection and a lot of different things, but help our listeners track. I mean, what should they be considering as they invest in real estate, and where do you usually come in?
My background is I bought my first piece of real estate, which was a commercial property and auto repair shop for $10,000 in back taxes while I was in law school. And then I flipped that business and building to graduate from law school without any debt and continued to invest in real estate. And I was like, who wouldn't after having such a big win? While I was working in litigation, suing insurance companies. And I built my own real estate portfolio and eventually was making more money doing real estate than I was being an attorney. So real estate gave me everything that I wanted. Gave me passive income. It's really stable. I was investing in single family homes at the time. And I started to travel. I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, was traveling through all of South America. I was doing exactly what the dream was until a friend of mine got sued for $3 million from a single lawsuit. And I was following his asset protection strategy, which was just have umbrella insurance and everything will be fine. And he lost over $3 million and he found out that there's limitations to what your insurance can do. And that's when I started getting really serious about asset protection, because I said, well, I need to make sure that I can't have these major setbacks in life, whether it's from asset protection or from tax audits or from a car accident that exceeds the limits of the liability of my insurances. And the general recommendation I have for everybody is, would you cry? Would you cry if you lost it? Because if you'd cry if you lost it, then it's worth protecting. If you don't care about any of your stuff and any of your money, then why protect it? Because you don't care about it. But most of us have worked really hard to have what we've accumulated, and losing what we've worked so hard for is not thinkable. That's why we're in real estate. It's because we want consistent, safe returns over time. We don't want to be gambling. And so this is what becoming the CEO of your own wealth building company is really all about. It's how do you remove the gambling? How do you make sure everything is done right? So that way you can scale effortlessly into the future.
Well, help us become that CEO of our own wealth building company and take that holistic view of protecting our assets. Like, what components are involved in that?
There's a few major components here, right? If we want to talk about like pillars, you're doing the hard work right now, Brian, right? Now, if we just take you as an example, because you're out there grinding, you're grinding to make top line revenue happen, right? There's no substitute for top line revenue. You have to be making money. Right? If you're not making money, there's nothing there to protect and there's nothing there to invest. So you got to be making money. And that's really the number one lever you have over your future, is actually how much money you can bring in. After you bring in that money, though, then it needs to become protected, and it needs to be motivated. That's got to be, and there's two major things it's got to be protected from. One, it's got to be protected from lawsuits. because lawsuits in this country can wipe you out completely, right? That's where asset protection comes in, compartmentalizing the assets, hiding them behind anonymous trusts. Then you got to make sure your family's protected, which means having a proper estate plan in place. So if something happens to you, they get immediate access to all of the assets. They don't have to go fight through a probate process and a court process, which potentially could mean that they don't actually get access to the assets you thought you were leaving them. And then you got to make sure it's protected from the government, because the government steals your money every single year through taxes, right? Well, you might be pro-tax guy, I don't know, right? But for most people out there, they say, hey, well, I want to pay all of the taxes that I'm legally obligated to pay. And I don't want to pay more taxes than I am legally obligated to pay. It says, well, great. Well, that's where a sophisticated tax strategy comes in, is knowing how do you do that. So then you protected your money from lawsuits. You protected your family from the court system and from probate court. You've protected your money from the government by making sure that you're minimizing your taxes. And then the only thing that's left for you to do is make proper investments that are going to give you net worth appreciation, proper cash flow to be able to hit your passive income goals. And the big reason why we're all in real estate, right? It's the depreciation benefits, bonus depreciation. How do you use the depreciation to be a big tax lever for you? So that way you can get your income as close to $0 in taxes as possible. And when you can dial in all these things correctly, you can protect all of your wealth, anonymize it, place it into investments that accelerates your cash flow net worth, and also get your taxes down to zero.
Well, help us dial in then. Like with the first component, I think you said was insurance, protecting yourself from lawsuits. Talk about that a little bit. Like what do you usually advise your clients?
So insurance is your first line of defense for any type of lawsuit that comes up. The issue is that we shouldn't trust insurance companies because they're profit-seeking corporations, right? Their business model is on collecting premiums and denying coverage. So we have to use them strategically, which means that we get liability insurance in place for our car, our houses, our investment properties. And if we're smart, what we do is we get the minimum coverage we can get on the underlying liability policy, and then get a $1 to $3 million umbrella policy on top, because that's really is what tips the balance. Now what you have is you have millions of dollars in coverage. So you have much better protection from the insurance providers for them to get rid of the claims first, because ideally somebody else will just take care of it if somebody's threatening to sue you or something bad happens. That's what we want, because that keeps life smooth, right? Remember, this whole thing is about is keeping life smooth, right? So, but the insurance companies may deny coverage anyway. Sometimes they do this, right? Especially when claims get expensive, right? And in that scenario where either it's an uncovered claim because it happened because of a text message you sent somebody or a contract you went into or a number of other reasons that just aren't covered by insurance at all in no circumstances, or it's a really expensive claim that happens, that's where you need asset protection. You need either series LLCs or LLCs or types of irrevocable trusts or Delaware statutory trusts, which depends upon the state where you live, the type of assets you have, what your financial scaling and plan looks like.
What's the minimum amount of insurance that someone should have for themselves? I heard you mention an umbrella policy. Explain that to people who may not have an umbrella policy. And then what do you like to see with your clients as far as insurance is concerned?
So the umbrella policies will actually dictate what is the very minimum that you need in underlying coverage. So the underlying coverage is like your auto policy that says, hey, you need at least $20,000 in coverage for your auto policy, for this umbrella policy that you're considering, right? So that $20,000 in coverage you get is the most expensive coverage. You have to pay a lot of money to get $20,000 in coverage, right? Thousands of dollars a year for some people, right? Because I have multiple cars, whatever they're doing. But after you get over that hurdle, then I can buy millions of dollars in coverage in an umbrella policy for hundreds of dollars a year. So $1 to $5 million in umbrella policy might only cost me, $500 to $1,000 a year, right? So what you're doing is playing this game of leverage where the insurance company says, well, in most cases, the claims are only like $20,000 or less. So we're going to charge you a lot of money for that. And you say, okay, but if I give you a little bit more money, will you give me tons more in coverage? And they say, yeah, we'll do that, because we know most of the time it's not going to exceed the $20,000 in coverage. So they're playing a game that says they're going to make more money But the game you're playing is I'm happy to pay a little bit extra to be able to have millions of dollars in coverage, because what I'm most interested in is a smooth life. And a smooth life happens when you have a belt and suspenders.
What do you usually advise? Like, are there different thresholds you advise as far as, okay, you should make sure you have $1 million umbrella if you have this much net worth? What are some of the metrics you look at?
Honestly, there's not like a particular formula for it. I typically would just say that, you should have at least $1 million in coverage, and then make sure that you have enough in coverage that, like, as you grow in net worth, that if you have enough in umbrella coverage that at least equals your net worth, that's great. Right. And you probably don't need to exceed 5 million.
Moving on to asset protection. You were talking about asset protection, entity formations. What do you typically advise your clients when it comes to that?
Number one thing, have great insurance, right? And the thing is that you just want to make sure that you have the great insurance like in place, and that we are going to additionally layer on and says, well, what happens if the insurance coverage is denied or is insufficient, or it's a type of claim that's never covered by insurance? So a type of claim that says, well, we signed a lease agreement, right? And now we have a breach of contract because of the lease agreement, or that there's an environmental hazard on one of the properties, or they're suing me because of a message that I sent via text message, which happened to one of my clients. There's a whole disagreement about what plumbing got replaced in a property. And it was $75,000 in claim damages that we got dropped because of the asset protection that we had in place. But it was just text messages. And that was enough to say, hey, you defrauded me, never covered by insurance. Her asset protection came in to do that. There's two major things that you want for asset protection. First major thing you want is to anonymize your ownership of everything. You want it to look like if anybody looks to come to sue you, because they'll research you to say, hey, what can I find out that Brian owns on the public records? What companies does he own? What assets does he have? When I sue him, essentially, what am I going to get? So you want to hide that. And the way you hide that is through the use of anonymous trusts or land trusts. These are all types of what we legally call revocable grantor trusts, right? We don't have to file tax returns for them. We don't have to pay anything to maintain them. We just put them in place and they act like a smoke screen for all of our assets and all of our companies. So if anybody looks to sue us, it looks like we qualify for food stamps. Still qualify for financing, fine, but we hide everything from anybody looking to sue us, right? From the public records. Next thing you want to do is compartmentalize all of your assets into an asset holding company. So Brian shouldn't own anything anymore. Brian should have an asset holding company that owns everything. So because Brian might get into a car accident. Somebody sues Brian. We want to make it where they can't take anything because Brian doesn't own anything anymore. Everything that Brian has is held inside of an asset holding company. This is what rich people do. This is how they control things but don't own anything, right? Inside of that asset holding company, what we do is compartmentalize every single asset. And the reason why is because, well, they sue Brian. Can he get to any assets? No, it's held inside of an asset holding company. What happens if there's somebody grandma falls to the staircase on one of the properties and she sues the property owner? Well, in that case, if we want it to be such that she can only attack that one property. So if you have all of your assets in your personal name, or you have all of the assets inside of a single LLC or inside of a single trust, a lawsuit against one of your assets means they can take all of your assets. And so you want to protect yourself from that by limiting what can be your losses. So that way, in the event of a lawsuit, you just don't really care all that much. You won't even really lose sleep because we can all afford to lose a little bit and say, well, that's just how business goes, right?
The asset holding company, is the same as just having an LLC for each property, or does it go deeper than that?
So it goes deeper than that in terms of cost efficiency, right? And tax efficiency. So people in California, for example, that are owning multiple assets will typically use something called the Delaware Statutory Trust because they want to have compartmentalization, they want to have anonymity, but they also want to avoid franchise taxes. So the franchise taxes in California are really high, so they can't have multiple LLCs because it eats up their margin, right, for what it costs for them to maintain the structure. Now, for the really old school way is to have what's called a hub and spoke, which is a Wyoming LLC that then owns LLCs, one for each asset in every state where the assets are located. And that's where you end up with people that are like, oh, I got like 15 LLCs, right? Because I have all these assets. Well, those people are paying a ton of money for all the yearly maintenance for LLCs. They had to pay to form them. And then what they had to do is to pay to maintain them every year. The public information reports, the franchise tax filings, the yearly fees from the state, yearly updates to their operating agreements and to their meeting minutes, all this stuff, right? So you, with the LLC model, you get great protection, but your costs are really high. And then you also had to maintain all these extra books and bank accounts, and it turns into a operational and cost nightmare. For 95% of our clients, what we use is something called a series LLC. And we form that in Delaware, Texas, Nevada, Wyoming, because all these states have charging order protection. Full faith and credit clause of the U.S. Constitution says we can form in one of those states, and then we can use it everywhere. Just like we have a Delaware LLC formed in Delaware and use it everywhere else, we can do the same thing with the series LLC. In the series LLC, we can create it anonymously. So it can be anonymously owned. But what's amazing about the series LLC is that I can create one company with one bank account, one set of accounting books, one cost to maintain it every year. But it can spawn children called child series. So this one parent company can create child series A, for example. Child series A doesn't require any filing to create. There's no cost associated with it, no yearly costs. Doesn't have to have its own bank account, doesn't have to have its own set of accounting books. And I can create an infinite number of them for free. So what does that mean? Ultimately, it means I can create an infinite number of companies for free. I can compartmentalize my assets as much as I want to. It doesn't cost me anything more in terms of dollars to do it. And I can maintain everything through the single bank account and the single set of accounting books as long as I tag the income and expenses in my accounting books per child series. So I was like, great, here is the rent for property A. Here's the expenses for property A. Just tag that inside of my QuickBooks account or however I'm doing my accounting. Make sure that I tag property B separately, and I'm good to go. And now I've accomplished everything I want because I've anonymized my ownership of all of my assets and my companies. I've compartmentalized them for liability purposes. I've compartmentalized them in a way that doesn't cost me anything extra in terms of dollars to maintain it. And I've kept my operational load low because I can operate everything through a single bank account and a single set of accounting books. And that's your ideal.
I'd like to take a moment to tell you about Green Property Management. Not only do they manage everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area, they also manage my entire portfolio. So I can tell you from personal experience that their unique flat fee management style is worth a closer look. If you feel that your property isn't operating to its fullest potential, then Green Property Management can help you take a holistic approach that will save you money, eliminate your headaches, and increase your net income. And if you're a property manager interested in applying Green Property Management's model, give them a call at 1-866-95-GREEN or visit them on the web at greenpropertymgt.com.
If you're thinking of leaving your W-2 job and becoming a full-time real estate investor, one of the greatest costs you must consider is healthcare for you and your family. When I made this transition myself, I found the whole healthcare insurance process to be confusing and frustrating. That's why I'm glad I met Chad Creasy at RCB and Associates. Chad is a professional health insurance agent who helps real estate investors and small business owners understand and choose their best healthcare options. And best of all, his services are covered by the insurance company and won't cost you a dime. If you live in Michigan and are expecting a change in your healthcare insurance coverage for any reason, or losing employer coverage or transitioning into Medicare, then you owe it to yourself to contact Chad Creasy at rcbassociatesllc.com. And that's called a Series LLC?
Series LLC.
And what states can you set them up in?
They've been around for over 20 years now. They're really safe entities. I think you can set it up in over 15 states. The states that you want to use, though, are typically Delaware, Texas, Nevada, and Wyoming that have charging order protection. My favorite states are Texas and Wyoming.
And why is that?
It just has to do with the nature of Wyoming is a little bit cheaper to form in, but Texas, I get some other advantages with having to do less paperwork for each child series. So it's really minimal. Either one of them are going to be fine. There's some stuff online you'll read that are people like will say, well, we don't know about series LLCs, yada, yada, yada. I'm going to tell you, we defend a lawsuit a month, right? With 2,000 clients over the last 12 years operating in all 50 states like we do. All the stuff you read online that says anti-series LLC is all just a bunch of people that really don't know what they're talking about, right? Because I'm in the trenches every day actually defending these companies, putting them up. I have been for a long time. And you're safe to use series LLC structures.
And if someone wants to take you up on that suggestion and set up their series LLC, is it something they can do themselves, or do they need help from a professional or an attorney?
It's kind of like trying to fix your own car, right? Like, could we all learn to be mechanics? Sure, right? It's probably going to work about the same, except in this case, what we're talking about is legal structures that are like Ferraris, right? So yeah, you can learn to be a Ferrari mechanic if you want to. My advice to everybody is to find professionals that make money the same way you make money. So if you're going to hire professional attorneys, CPAs, CFOs, MBAs, investment strategists, etc., make sure that they make money in real estate. If that's the way that you're wanting to make money, right? That they actually do it for themselves as much as they help you with. And then try to push as much as you possibly can to them, because they're already going to have efficiencies and insights and how all of the pieces need to fit together. And what that does and should do is enable you to free your time to create more income, because it's the one thing that a professional team can't do for you. And the number one thing that drives your accelerates your path to financial freedom is it's your top line revenue. After you get everything else sorted out and get all the right tax strategy and the right investment strategy and all the right asset protection and all the estate planning, the only thing that's left to the game is how much money can you bring in? How well can that money get deployed? And the better you can play that simple game is the faster you're going to get to financial freedom.
Well, let's talk about the third component that you brought up, which is that estate planning. Talk about that and what you typically advise for your clients.
So we're looking at a estate plan that has a few different parts. It has to have a few different parts because to really be comprehensive. The number one thing we find is that people without estate plans, their assets all get pushed through a court system, which can take up to 2 to 3 years in some circumstances. All the assets become part of the public record, and that they accumulated sometimes millions and millions of dollars in assets, thinking that this was going to be fine to take care of their family, but their family can't actually get access to them because they're caught up in court. Right. Or they create a target on the back of their family members because now somebody else knows that so-and-so inherited, $500,000 or $1 million in real estate, or whatever the case may be. Right. So it's important to keep privacy there. It's important to keep it out of the court system to make sure that your family is protected. And what you need as part of a comprehensive estate plan to do that is a living trust. And so in a living trust, it keeps everything anonymous. It makes sure that your family gets direct access and immediate access to all of the assets. And with the living trust, what's really important is that the assets are actually transferred into the trust, not just once, but you continually clean it up every year, right? Because you're going to buy things and you're going to forget to put it in there. Listen, we see it every single day. Nobody that's ever come through the doors of Royal Legal Solutions has been properly maintaining their estate plan. It's just never happened. In fact, most of the time what happens is people go to an attorney or LegalZoom or something. They'll have an estate plan like a living trust created. They never transferred any of the assets. They've never cleaned up all the assets they have, in the past to be put in, like even for like this year. They haven't created schedules, meaning like lists of here's the accounts, all the bank accounts with the logins and the contact people that you need to get a hold of so people know where the money is at. How do we even get access to it? That's there. So there's a little bit of maintenance. It takes about half hour a year to make sure that your estate plan is actually properly maintained. But the real critical piece there is having a living trust in place.
And you hear the term revocable or irrevocable living trust. I mean, what's the difference there, and what do you advise?
There's only one type of trust for an estate plan, typically, right? That's sheer just estate planning purposes. And that's called a revocable living trust. The irrevocable trust is something that people do for estate planning purposes, but it's really to avoid tax and accomplish some asset protection. And it has to do with once you start butting up against stuff that comes into like the estate tax thresholds, either on the state or federal level. Right. So those are more typically it's tax issues that are spawning, having to do these types of irrevocable trusts. But the basic thing that everybody should have, no matter who you are, if you care about your family and how wealth is going to get passed to your family, or how your family's going to get taken care of, especially if you have kids, is the revocable living trust that spells out who gets what. They get access to it immediately, who's going to take care of the kids, all the nuts and bolts of what's life going to go like now that you're not there to take care of it for everybody.
You talk about people set up the trust, but then they don't move their assets into that trust. What does it take to actually transfer your assets into a trust? Is it just changing the operating agreement? Do you have to go file a deed? I mean, what is typically involved in that?
So the best thing to do is actually just have your living trust own your asset holding company, like your Series LLC, and then have your Series LLC own all of your assets. And so in that way, you're just doing the transactions like you normally would to protect the assets during your life, right? Because you're just going to buy it and then transfer it into probably like a land trust or something and have that land trust be owned by your Series LLC so you can use the bank financing, traditional standard financing, and still be able to acquire that 1 to 4 unit property. And the reason why that becomes great is because then there's only one thing you have to do, which is whatever assets you acquire, just make sure that they're protected during your lifetime, which is transfer them inside of your asset holding company. Because the asset holding company is owned by the living trust, then there's no things that you have to update on an ongoing basis.
What is involved in transferring it into your trust?
Well, in this case, there would be no additional transfer required, right? So if you wanted to otherwise transfer an asset into a trust directly, which I don't recommend because a trust provides no asset protection. So if somebody sues you, they can actually take all of your assets that are inside of your trust. That's why you need an asset holding company in conjunction with your living trust. For a piece of real estate, that would be for a deed, right? For a piece of a tangible property, that would probably be an assignment of interest. Or for a brokerage account, that would be changing the name on the brokerage account to be the name of the living trust.
And then I believe the fourth component was tax, making it as beneficial as possible from a tax perspective. What do you typically advise there?
So what we always tell everybody is that if you're making over $150,000 a year, or you're paying over $20,000 in tax, everything that we do for you will pay for itself. And then some of it will be your very best investment you ever make because we're so good at tax. And tax is the one thing that all wealthy people focus on first. And the reason they focus on it first is because it's the only guaranteed return on investment you can make. And it's typically the highest return. So for every dollar you spend protecting yourself from tax, typically it will pay you out at least 30 to 50 cents a year, right? 30, 50% returns are ridiculous, especially cash flowing returns. You can typically only get those from tax on a guaranteed basis. To get those kinds of tax savings, to give you those types of returns that you need for what you're spending to save money on tax, you got to focus on 3 things. The 3 things you got to focus on is maximizing all of your deductions. So those are like your home office deductions you're taking if you're using like the Augusta rule to be able to rent out your primary residence without actually having to rent it out. If you want to be sheltering money through your kids, writing off your cars, writing off the trips that you're doing, make sure to take all of those deductions. Classify them appropriately. Make sure everything you're doing is legal, right? You don't want to get caught in an audit trying to do stuff that's shady. Just be really strategic and detailed, and you won't run afoul of any rules. The number 2 thing you need to do is tax shelters. So inside of tax shelters, there's the things that you've probably heard about, right? Self-directed IRAs, solo 401ks, defined benefit plans, all those types of retirement kinds of vehicles. There's also much more sophisticated things that previously were reserved for the really wealthy that I've worked to bring to the common real estate investor, right? That person that's, anywhere between, 0 to 10 million total net worth. And those things are like private foundations that can help you shelter up to 30% of your income per year and will grow just like a retirement account, but you can withdraw money from it without any penalty, unlike a retirement account. So people that are seeking financial freedom, it's the number one thing to do because it doesn't matter whether the income comes from W-2 or 1099 or whatever source. 30% of your income, non-taxable right off the top. Massive, massive win for that. And ultimately, after you get all of your deductions and your tax shelters right, you're going to need to layer in the third leg of the stool, which is what type of investments you're using. So there's some investments out there that are going to pay you huge cash flow. You can get 20 to 25% annual cash flow investing inside of some small business funds, right? If you're going to want tax benefit style investing, then it's going to probably be, oil and gas or machinery based investments to give you depreciation to offset your taxes if you're W-2 income, And if you can qualify as a real estate professional, then you might be looking at, like right now, you want to be looking at like self-storage units. All of these types of investments, just in cash flow and net worth, what we target at is a 20 to 30% return for the types of syndications that I invest my own personal money into, and that we work with clients to help them find money. We don't advise you on a particular investment you make, but I'll introduce you to the people that are inside of like my network, for example, if that's something you're interested in. But the big kicker is the depreciation. Because when you can get 180% bonus depreciation, like check out this math, right? If I place $100,000 investment and I get 180% bonus depreciation, now I get $180,000 that I don't have to pay in tax, right? If I'm at, let's say like, what's some easy math here? If I'm at a 10% tax bracket, right? And you're already killing it on tax. Let's say I'm at a 10% tax bracket. That means that I just made $18,000 in my pocket in tax savings, right? Because it's 10% of the 180 offset, because I'm at a 10% tax bracket. If I'm at a 20% tax bracket, it's $36,000, right? And if I'm at a 30% tax bracket, because you're a high W-2 earner, otherwise making some money and you haven't really offset anything, well, then you can do the math there, right? So your $100,000 investment might pay you a first year return just on tax savings of over 50%. And then the investment also has returns on top of it. And that's why we say it's like, holy smokes, if you can get into the right investments after you get your deductions and your tax shelter set correctly, this is how the wealthy get down to $0 in tax.
What investments do you see that actually offer 180% bonus depreciation?
So right now, Patriot Fund, that's like 160 or 180, I think, for this year. But they actually have self-storage units that are pushing out 180%. I think last year, my investment I placed with them was at 200%. These depreciation numbers are going to decrease by 20% each year. So it's actually important to push more money into syndications that have properly aligned themselves to maximize the amount of depreciation they're allotted to be able to provide investors during these years, because it's not guaranteed we're going to have these types of tax benefit leverage types of investments, after the clock runs out here in 3 to 4 years.
As we wrap it up, what is your favorite hack or app?
My favorite app right now is actually a meditation app. It's really simple, but I find that what becomes really, really important more and more in my life is actually not how much I can do, but how clearly I can think.
What's the name of the app?
I think it's just called Meditation Timer. It has just like a little bowl, and it's like super simple. All it does is just count down like a timer. And it's like, great. And I'll play some music if I wanted to or something like that. But I guess you could just use a clock app too and just have like a timer, on it. But
and then how would people find out more about you or get a hold of you?
So my company is royallegalsolutions.com. And what we're doing right now is like done for you solutions to help people become the CEO of their own wealth building company that's built and managed for them. Right. And they use the full support of my team of attorneys, paralegals, MBAs, CFOs, and investment strategists. And it takes about 6 weeks to get fully built and up and running. To get more information about how does that work, what does that team like, the success stories that we've had working with people, best thing to do is just go to royallegalsolutions.com, watch the video that's there on the homepage. And if it feels appropriate, then schedule a call with the paralegal team. You're never going to talk to anybody that's on the sales. We don't have a sales team. You talk immediately to professionals. So it's just royallegalsolutions.com, watch the video that's there on the homepage, and then schedule your 15-minute call with the paralegal team to discuss to see if you're somebody that we can hit a home run for.
And that's royallegalsolutions.com. Scott, thanks so much for coming back on the show today and taking some very complex topics and making them very understandable and relatable. I really appreciate the way you've been able to just kind of explain things in a way that makes sense, because I hear these topics brought up many times. I've read a lot of articles, but a lot of times it goes over your head. And I think you've done a great job of making it something relatable. So thank you very much for having this conversation. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks, Brian. Great to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity.
I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode. I'm your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group, and you can find out more about me by going to higinvestor.com. That's HIGinvestor.com.